What's the worst job in the world that you absolutely wouldn't do? Story 1. Working in a call center is a real soul drainer. You're constantly trying to find a way out, hoping to land something that won't mean a total cut in pay and benefits. It takes a certain kind of mentality to cope with this gig. Me, I've been stuck on the phones for a whopping 18 years now. It's hard to believe, but I kinda enjoyed it. I'm not entirely sure what that says about me though. Essentially, you're making cold calls and believe me, people loathe it. About 90% of the time, you're met with radio silence. Another 9% of folks who do pick up just hurl obscenities your way. And the lucky 1% that actually engage in conversation, well, they'll hang up once they realize you're selling stuff. But it really depends on the program you're stuck on. When I was selling software, it was a blast. No script, no pressure to push unnecessary products, and absolutely no need to fib. I loved every minute of it. Then came the dark days when they shuffled me over to a program where lying was practically in the job description. We had to recite a script word for word, and the mission was to sell services that nobody really needed. Not exactly my cup of tea. What's truly disheartening is that it doesn't have to be this terrible, especially with incoming calls, but more often than not, it is. The whole ordeal is made even worse by those blasted metrics. You know, the ones that make no sense in the real world, like measuring success by the time spent in the call rather than actually solving problems, or when the company pushes these anti-consumer practices that force you to intentionally irritate most callers. Retentions, I'm glaring at you. It can actually be a halfway decent job when there's enough staff, and you're servicing internal clients who share the same goals, even if it means enduring lengthy calls. On the flip side, I believe everyone should have to endure this grind for at least a month, just to witness how rude some people can be. Most people hate these business practices, but customer service agents are just trying to make a living. Let's show them some kindness, yeah? Story 2. Being a caregiver for elderly people with dementia is no walk in the park. Under the best of circumstances, this job is incredibly challenging, and most caregivers don't have the luxury of ideal conditions. I once worked as an assistant at a memory care center for 6 months, making a humble $10 an hour. My typical shift involved the daunting task of getting over 30 residents ready for bed all by myself. On top of that, I had to serve them dinner and tackle their laundry. Meanwhile, the senior staff were raking in big bonuses for every new resident they brought in and showed no interest in hiring additional assistants when we were severely understaffed. Then in 2019, just before the pandemic struck, I worked as a supply director for another elderly home. I frequently made supply runs to the 3rd floor, which housed dementia patients. There was one resident, a petite African-American lady everyone affectionately called Miss Maggie. She would greet me with, "There's my handsome baby. Home from the war, everybody. He's safe." I guess seeing a young guy in his 20s triggered a memory of her son leaving or returning from the war. It later dawned on me that Miss Maggie's son had never returned from the war. Learning that fact really hit me hard. The challenges you face as a caregiver are multifaceted. There's the physical aspect, such as lifting patients into bed or assisting them in and out of chairs. Then there's the unfortunate reality of dealing with violent behavior from dementia patients, something I've witnessed firsthand in care homes. This line of job places an enormous amount of stress and strain on your body. On the mental front, you have to handle the aggression I mentioned earlier, as well as the confusion and disorientation experienced by those with dementia. You also have to cope with numerous deaths and everything that comes with it, including the difficult task of informing and consoling grieving families. And then there's the less glamorous side, cleaning up. While dealing with messy kids is challenging enough, having to care for grown adults in such circumstances is 100 times tougher, especially when they aren't cooperative or aware of what's happening. Anyone who chooses this profession deserves our utmost respect. Story 3. Debt collection or any of those predatory call center jobs. I spent quite a while in collections, and believe it or not, I even snagged an award for having this sky-high collection and resolution rate. Now here's the kicker. Since I was a supervisor, what was really happening is I was settling those outstanding debts for, well, pennies, if you can believe it. At first, I had this whole rationale going, claiming it saved us time and money to settle, but when I started clearing $2,000 debts for something like $50, my superior started giving me the stink eye, big time. I kept at it though, right up until the day I decided to throw in the towel. It might not have been much, but I hope I managed to lift some of that crushing weight off people's shoulders. My mindset was pretty much in the same place during my nightmarish year at ITT Tech's online division, which was essentially an outbound call center. By the time I made my exit, I had put anyone in the company's do not call list at the slightest hesitation to sign up for a campus tour. The metrics were beyond lousy, but let's be real, the company was already sinking like a stone, and the leads we had were downright terrible. Nobody was acing their metrics, and with the epic turnover rate, they couldn't afford to lose anyone with at least 2 brain cells to rub together. I started hunting for a new job just a month or 2 later because bills don't pay themselves, right? But ultimately, I walked away after a year, and lo and behold, ITT Tech closed its doors completely a few months afterward. Good riddance, I say. Oh, and speaking of quick exits, I had this friend who signed up with a collections agency and lasted less than 5 days. The whole first week was supposed to be training, but by lunchtime on Friday, she strolled up to her instructor, handed in her badge, and flat out told him she couldn't stomach what they were doing. Some jobs just aren't worth it, you know?
Shh, here's a little secret for you. This video is sponsored by none other than me and my team at Rufus Rugs. We're the masters of creating custom, hand-tufted rugs that capture who you truly are. Whether you want to transform one of our intriguing thumbnails into a rug, for a friend, obviously, or you're craving a room makeover with awesome anime-inspired designs, we've got your back. Oh, and did I mention, each and every rug is skillfully handcrafted by me and my friends. No BS dropshipping gimmick here. You'll be blown away by your rug. Hit the first link in the description to learn more.
Story 4. I may not be directly answering your question, but I've got a tale to tell about a job I had in the past, one I'll never return to, no matter what. I spent what feels like a lifetime slaving away in restaurants. Those last 2 years during the pandemic were the tipping point of many of us in the food service business, including yours truly. I just recently called it quits after a decade of pouring my heart into it. It's an industry that lures you in with your passion and then, bit by bit, devours it. It's like we've all been brainwashed into thinking that sacrificing everything for a minimum wage career is somehow worth it because we love cooking or baking. Well, I'm done with it, and all I've got left is this lingering bitterness. I shared my sentiments with a friend, and he opened up about his own experience. Here's how his story goes. He brewed beer for a solid 10 years, but it was a similar story. He told me that brewing can be incredibly stressful, with heavy labor and long hours. One wrong move and you're watching $250,000 literally go down the drain, and all you get in return is some street cred. Sure, there are a few good breweries out there, but most of them exploit your loyalty to your fellow workers and your passion. Towards the end, he felt like the owners were keeping him hooked with free beer and working him to the bone, leaving him with no energy to find a new job. He's pretty resentful about it too, as you can imagine. He did mention one bright spot though, the tap room bartenders. Pouring beers there was low stress and customers generally loved being part of the experience. Tips were pretty darn good too. They didn't have to deal with the complexities of food or mixed drinks, so there's that silver lining at least. Anthony Bourdain said, service staff is an unpardonable sin. So stop saying, let me speak to the manager and have respect. Story 5. Working as a janitor and senior carer dealing with sewage. Major props to those who tackle these jobs, but for me, it's a hard pass. I've been hearing from a lot of people who actually enjoy their janitorial or sewage gigs. You guys often say, once you get past the gross part, I totally get it. It's not a bad job at all. I genuinely respect those who do it day in and day out, but here's the deal. It's just too much grossness for my liking. Now, your specific role may not involve a ton of yucky stuff, but when the truly icky situations arise, guess who gets called in to handle them? Yep, me. And honestly, I don't want any part of that. My dad used to work as a school janitor, and he always said it was pretty chill. Sure, he had to clean some seriously nasty bathrooms, but the job came with nifty equipment that did most of the heavy lifting. So he wasn't down on his hands and knees scrubbing away. Kid vomit on the floor? No problem. Just sprinkle some sawdust solution on it and it soaks right up. All you have to do is sweep it away. And if there was a task he couldn't handle solo, he could always count on his fellow janitors to lend a hand. He spent most of his time mopping while jamming to his music, and nobody really bothered him. The lunch ladies at school let him take home pretty much as much leftover food as he wanted, so there were definitely some perks to the job. Plus, there are plenty of benefits, and the schedule lines up with the school calendar, which means holidays, breaks, and all that jazz. So it's got perks if you can handle the occasional mess. Story 6. Anything related to patient care is pretty much a no-go for me. You see, I have this thing about people throwing up. It freaks me out big time. I doubt I'd be able to handle it. I'm pretty sure I'd eventually get used to it. Honestly, seeing someone barfing doesn't bother me at all that much. But whenever I'm around someone who's tossing their cookies, my brain goes into overdrive with thoughts like, ugh, I'm going to be sick like this in a few days. It's like a switch flips and I'm stuck with severe anxiety for the rest of the day. Explaining it is a real challenge. Yeah, I know it's called emetophobia. I'm just trying to convey the intense anxiety that comes with it to those who might not understand why it's such a big deal for us emetophobes. Someone once mentioned that this anxiety might actually be a defensive mechanism we've evolved. It's like our bodies have developed this response because there's a good chance we've witnessed a fellow tribe member get sick and then experienced it ourselves. It's almost like our bodies are saying, now I too must purge. So maybe it's not just a phobia. It's our body's way of reacting to something it has evolved to do as a protective measure. Being tough as nails in the medical field isn't mandatory, but it's definitely a plus. I mean, who wants to deal with all that less than pleasant stuff if they don't have to? Story 7. My husband used to work as a crime scene cleaner. Surprisingly, he didn't really mind the job. The only downside was the unpredictable schedule. You never knew when you'd get the call, even in the middle of the night. Sometimes he'd have to pack up and head out of state, and who knew how long he'd be gone. But hey, the pay was fantastic. Story 8. Being a prison guard, you're often looking at low pay and the constant need to watch your back. However, there's another side to it that I've heard about. 6 figures with plenty of overtime and those grueling 12-hour shifts. If you're in a management position, you can expect a base salary of around 80,000 Canadian dollars. Although I can't provide the details for the base CO pay elsewhere, it's worth mentioning that not every location offers such dismal pay. In Canada, for instance, some places come pretty close to 6 figures. I recall a conversation with a woman who used to be a prison nurse. She shared that dealing with what she called drive-bys, those impromptu solo sessions by inmates, took some getting used to, but she brushed it off as just another part of the job. Fun times, right? Then there was the time I talked to a female CO who worked in a high-security male prison. She had some stories to tell. She mentioned meal times in a specific ward, which involved opening trapdoors to send in the food. However, a few inmates decided it was a good time for something else. So when she'd open that door, she'd be met with, well, you can probably guess. Plus the fact that you're also in a prison. It's definitely not for the faint of heart. Story 9. Being a child welfare worker was my father's third and final career, and he couldn't wait for the day he could retire. He just couldn't stomach it. Despite providing a much-needed service to the community, he received no appreciation from the others involved. Kids despised him because he was the one removing them from their, often cruel, parents. Parents resented him because he was taking their children, no matter how justified it was. Lawyers seemed to endlessly attack him, and judges didn't hesitate to lay into the social worker. To make matters worse, the pay was far from generous. It's definitely a job I wouldn't consider. It's a gig that's both underpaid and underappreciated, and it demands more work than you can imagine, all while requiring a high level of education. A 4-year degree for a mere $35,000 a year? That's the stark reality of social work and human services without an MSW. In other words, this is essentially my life. I genuinely love what I do, but I'd also love to see more than $39,000 on my paycheck before taxes. Social workers are seriously underpaid and underappreciated, but hey, at least they have job security. If you respect hardworking people, then let's show them some love by hitting that like and subscribe button. Story 10. The guy who cleans up road. I've worked alongside those guys at the highway department before. Surprisingly, their job isn't as bad as you might imagine. Their day follows a simple routine and it's generally peaceful. They don't have to deal with homeowners, customers, or anyone hassling them about how long the job takes. Plus, they get to explore new places every day, often surrounded by nature. Sure, dealing with it might be disturbing initially, especially for some more than others, but their mission is to improve the situation. And when you consider some of the other jobs out there, it's not all that bad. Story 11. Cleaning septic tanks. Now that's a job that deserves a salute. May not know who exactly takes on this task, but I've got mad respect for those brave individuals who tackle that kind of mess. My dad happens to be one of those unsung heroes. Surprisingly, he doesn't mind it much. He's not easily grossed out, and what sets him apart is his knack for customer interaction. People adore him. Consequently, he has a loyal customer base that frequently rewards him with gifts and generous tips. However, there's a catch. He returns home smelling rather pungent every day and practically sprints to the shower for a solid hour. It's also worth mentioning that he never graduated from high school, which limits his job options. Nevertheless, he'd tell you that it pays the bills, and all in all, he's a pretty content guy. Story 12. Deep sea diver or welder? I'm 42 now, and maybe 20 years ago I would have entertained that thought, but not anymore. At this point in my life, if I had to choose, I'd rather change light bulbs in one of those insanely tall cell towers. You see, there's a good reason why those deep-sea professionals are paid ridiculously high salaries. It's a highly specialized and high-risk occupation. They spend days and days submerged in the depths, which, I must say, is pretty darn fascinating. Have you ever heard of saturation diving? Some of them stay under for remarkably extended periods. In fact, it's one of the most perilous jobs in the world, with accidents that can be downright horrifying. If you are the curious type, you can look up one of the more famous accidents by Googling Byford Dolphin Accident. Working in the deep sea is indeed a high-pressure job. Story 13. I wouldn't want a job where a single mistake could ruin someone's life or even cost them their life, so no to law enforcement, medical professions, driving, and the like. See, I'm a developer, and I'll be the first to admit that I make dozens of mistakes every single day. It's all part of the process, and usually the consequences aren't too dire. But then there's that hypothetical scenario that gives me chills. Imagine the boss walking in one day and dropping this bombshell. Boss, I need you to develop a self-driving car. Suddenly, the car finds itself in a no-win situation. There's an obstacle ahead, and if the car hits it, the sole occupant will surely die. However, there's an escape route, but in its path are a grandmother and her grandchild. The car must make a split-second decision. Sacrifice the two innocents or save your single customer? Who do you choose? Or more unsettlingly, who will the company allow you to choose? Story 14. I'm open to trying sales, but please don't dress it up as customer care or informing when it's really sales. You know who you are, every charity organization out there. As for careers, I'd steer clear of being a cop or anything military is a big no for me. It's just not my cup of tea, and I'd rather not get involved in that kind of work. It feels like a lose-lose situation. Then there's the whole influencer thing. My private life is private, and I'd rather keep it that way. Being the spotlight 24/7 isn't my idea of fun. Don't even get me started on being a streamer or vlogger. Sure, they can rake in the cash, but you're always on camera, watching every word you say. It takes the joy out of gaming, if that's your thing, and turns it into a job instead of a hobby. Plus the never-ending drama and rumors you have to deal with or dodge. No thank you. Story 15. Being a carer or teacher for people with disabilities is no small feat. I've witnessed the toll it can take on my dad firsthand. My sister is nonverbal and has severe autism, which means her care is a full-time job in itself. Every day, my dad faces a tremendous amount of stress. The lack of control in his life, the isolation, and the scarcity of time for his own interests and relationships, especially with my mom, all make it incredibly challenging. He's tasked with looking after a physically aggressive and often unruly child who can't comprehend boundaries or concepts like waiting. It's like caring for a grown woman trapped in a child's body.
but he does it out of love for her. Given what I've seen my dad go through, I can't fathom doing this kind of work for strangers, solely for the sake of earning a living. It takes a special kind of dedication and love to handle the demands of caring for individuals with disabilities. Being a caregiver is a tough job. Honestly, though, who else could handle potty duty with a smile on their face? Story 16. I'm willing to do it because I'm jobless, but I think being a dishwasher is one of the worst, most available jobs you can have in an urban setting right now. Why? It's one of the lowest paid, least respected, and most stressful jobs, in a direct way. Basically, no one can do a thing if you're not fast enough, because the cooks need their stuff and the tables need theirs, as do the waiters. You work the longest hours and you're always working. You're usually a jack of all trades. Clean the bathroom, the saloon, help the cooks, take out the trash, bring heavy stuff from the storage room, you name it. I've worked 13-plus hour shifts without even a break to eat something during events. You're always on your feet, not a good thing for that long, and you're constantly bending forward, which can destroy your lumbar area. You're constantly dealing with water, waste, and chemicals, so you end up psychologically, physically, and economically drained with no real benefits. Story 17. I grew up on a farm. When I was a kid, I thought I wanted to be a farmer. Working for my dad cured me of that. He's kind of a jerk, but he unwittingly did me a favor. If he'd been nice and wonderful to work with, I might have ended up trapped in that farm. In some ways, it doesn't seem like a terrible gig. You're your own boss, there's a variety of work. Some days it's hard manual labor, others it's diesel engine repair, and others it's business administration. But I think it's stressful. A lot of farms fail. My dad once said that farming was fun when he felt he was making an honest living, but not since the government began paying a big portion of his salary through various means. Story 18. Waiters, servers, or anyone in the food and beverage industry. Let's face it, people can be real animals at restaurants and bars. You walk in as a server and they treat you like you're their personal servant. Hospitality folks often get the short end of the stick, all because their job is to try and make you happy. So they put up with all kinds of crap without yelling back or calling you out on your nonsense. You know, I used to feel so bad for servers working on Sundays, especially during breakfast and lunch shifts. It got to the point where I stopped going out to eat on Sundays altogether. Surprisingly, I found that obnoxiously drunk people were often more respectful than the average Sunday church crowd. It's like some of the most entitled, bigoted, and disrespectful folks were congregating in the pews. And hey, let's not forget our honorable mention, nurses. Especially those in the ER, ICU, NICU, and other high-stress areas. They deal with people needing urgent care or stuck in the hospital for extended stays. They often work those grueling 12-hour shifts. It's a tough job for many reasons. Story 19. I'm a paramedic, and let me tell you, I wouldn't exactly roll out of the welcome mat for anyone thinking of joining this profession. Sure, there are moments when it feels rewarding, but honestly, the crap we have to deal with regularly makes it hard to recommend. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, our pay. It's shockingly low for the work we do. Sure, the municipal government and our management like to throw around the word heroes, but we don't see much hero treatment in our day-to-day. Vacation and time off? Forget about it. We're constantly denied those luxuries. Our shifts are a grueling 12 hours, but it's not uncommon to find ourselves clocking in more than 13 hours without a break or even a moment to catch our breath. And don't get me started on some of our patients. Let's just say they're not always the most pleasant or easygoing. Thanks to the never-ending problem of the pandemic and years of being underpaid and underappreciated, we're staff faster than we can bring in new recruits. And when we do hire, let's just say the quality isn't always top-notch. Many newbies have had their education and field experience cut short because of all the safety protocols. So here's the bottom line. This job isn't what it used to be, and until things change, I'd think long and hard before jumping into this profession. Alright, let's show some love to those in the medical field. Remember, healthy healthcare workers are life-saving healthcare workers. If they're not doing well, then we're all screwed. If you had a good time watching this video, then check out What Job Exists Because We Are Stupid. Story 3 is great. See you there.